There is a moment in every relationship when your constant availability stops being seen as kindness. It becomes expectation. They expect your reply. They expect your attention. They expect your forgiveness. They expect you to be there whenever they need you. And the moment your availability becomes predictable, your value begins to disappear from their mind, not because you became less valuable, because human beings rarely appreciate what they believe they can access at any moment. The person who is always available becomes part of the background. Like the light in a room, you only notice it when it disappears. And this is where most people make their greatest mistake. They believe that if they give more, respond faster, explain themselves more clearly, and remain constantly present, people will value them more. But psychology often works in the opposite direction. The more accessible you become without limits, the less people are forced to consider your value. The more you chase someone, the more comfortable they become with being chased. The more quickly you answer every message, the less significance your attention carries. The more often you forgive without consequence, the more people learn that they can hurt you and still keep access to you. But the moment you stop being endlessly available, something changes. The balance shifts, the silence becomes noticeable, your absence becomes information, and suddenly people begin to ask questions they never asked when you were always there. Where are you? Why aren't you responding? Why are you no longer trying? Did something change? This is the psychology of scarcity. What is always available is rarely examined. What becomes difficult to access becomes valuable. But understand this clearly. Stopping your availability is not about playing childish games. It is not about pretending to be busy while staring at your phone. It is not about ignoring people to manipulate them into chasing you. That is not power. That is insecurity wearing a mask. True power is different. True power is the ability to withdraw your attention without collapsing emotionally. It is the ability to stop giving your energy to people who become careless with it. It is the ability to leave a conversation without forcing the other person to understand your departure. It is the ability to stop explaining your boundaries to someone who benefits from crossing them, because the moment you no longer need to be constantly seen, constantly needed, and constantly validated, you become difficult to control. And that is when everything begins to change. First change, people begin to nod your absence. When you are always available, your presence gradually becomes invisible. Not because you are unimportant, but because human beings become accustomed to what they can access without effort. If you answer every message immediately, appear whenever someone calls, listen whenever they need to speak, and continue offering your time regardless of how they treat you, your presence begins to feel less like a gift and more like a permanent feature of their world. They no longer experience the possibility of losing your attention, so they have no reason to truly examine its value. This is one of the most subtle psychological shifts in human relationships. People often do not appreciate what is constantly within reach. They may care about you, but familiarity creates a strange kind of blindness. Your support becomes expected, your kindness becomes routine, your availability becomes assumed. They may not consciously decide to take you for granted. It happens gradually through repetition. Every time you respond instantly, every time you cancel your own plans to accommodate them, every time you return after being ignored, you teach them that your presence requires no effort to maintain. Then something changes. You stop appearing so quickly, you stop answering every call, you stop initiating every conversation, you stop rushing to repair every moment of distance. At first, they may not react, they may assume you are busy, they may believe you will return to your old behaviors soon. But as the silence continues, your absence begins to occupy space in their mind. The conversations you once carried now feel empty. The attention you once provided is missing. The comfort they once received from knowing you were always there is no longer guaranteed. They begin to notice the difference between having access to you and having your genuine presence. Your absence forces them to confront something they could ignore while you were constantly available. Your time was never unlimited, your attention was never an obligation, and your presence was never something they owned. This is why distance can reveal value more clearly than constant closeness. When you are always present, people can postpone appreciation. When you step back, they are forced to remember what your presence actually gave them. They may begin to revisit old conversations, remember your support, notice the effort you once made, and wonder why you no longer offer it so freely. The important shift is not that you suddenly became more valuable. The shift is that your value is no longer being hidden by your constant availability. Second change. Your attention becomes more valuable. Attention is one of the most valuable forms of energy you possess, yet most people give it away without realizing what they are losing. Every message you answer, every argument you enter, every explanation you provide, and every person you constantly pursue receives a portion of your mental presence. When you give your attention freely to everyone, at every moment it gradually loses its significance. Your responses become automatic, your presence becomes predictable. People no longer experience your attention as something meaningful because because they have learned that it is always available whenever they want it. But the moment you become selective, the psychology changes. When you stop responding instantly to every demand, people begin to recognize that your attention has limits. You are no longer reacting to everything simply because someone expects you to. You are choosing where your energy goes. This creates a sense of value because attention that is difficult to obtain often feels more significant than attention that is constantly given away. This does not mean you should pretend to be busy or deliberately ignore people to create anxiety. Artificial scarcity is easily recognized, and manipulation eventually destroys trust. The real power comes from having a life that does not revolve around responding to every person who demands access to you. You have responsibilities, goals, thoughts, and priorities that exist beyond the immediate needs of others. When you honor those priorities, your attention becomes more intentional. People begin to notice the difference between your automatic presence and your chosen presence. When you respond, it carries more meaning because you could have chosen not to. When you give someone your time, they understand that your time is not unlimited. When you enter a conversation, your participation feels more valuable because you are not constantly available for every conversation happening around you. This also changes the way you see other people. Instead of allowing the loudest person to control your attention, you begin to ask who actually deserves it. You stop giving equal energy to those who bring value and those who bring chaos. You stop allowing someone else's urgency to automatically become your emergency. You realize that a person demanding your attention is not necessarily a person worthy of it. The more selective you become, the more powerful your attention feels. You are no longer scattered across countless people, arguments, and distractions. Your energy becomes concentrated. Your words become more deliberate. Your presence becomes less common and therefore more noticeable. People begin to understand that receiving your attention is no longer an automatic privilege, but something connected to the quality of the relationship, the level of respect, and the value of the interaction. Third change, people begin to test your boundaries. When you stop being endlessly available, people often begin to test your boundaries. This happens because every relationship develops patterns. People become accustomed to the level of access you allow them to have. If you have always answered immediately, accepted every request, tolerated every interruption, and forgiven every act of disrespect, then your sudden change creates uncertainty. They may not understand the change, but they will notice that the old version of you is no longer responding in the same way. At first, the test may be subtle. Someone may send multiple messages because you did not respond quickly. They may ask why you are suddenly busy. They may make a sarcastic comment about how you have changed. They may create a small crisis to see whether you will abandon your priorities and return to your old pattern. The purpose is not always conscious. People often test boundaries instinctively. They are trying to discover whether your new behavior is real or temporary. This is where many people lose their progress. They establish a boundary, encounter resistance, and immediately retreat. They say they are no longer available at all hours, but respond the moment someone becomes angry. They say they will not tolerate disrespect, but remain in the conversation when someone insults them. They claim they need space, but begin chasing the moment the other person withdraws. Their words say one thing, but their behavior teaches something else. People believe what you consistently do, not what you occasionally announce. If you want your boundaries to become real, they must remain intact when tested. You do not need to become aggressive. You do not need to deliver a long speech explaining your position. In many situations, the most powerful response is simply to maintain your decision without emotional drama. The person who is accustomed to unlimited access may become uncomfortable. They may accuse you of being distant, selfish, arrogant, or uncaring. Sometimes these accusations are designed to make you feel guilty enough to return to your old behavior. They remember all the times you were available for them and use your past generosity as evidence that you owe them the same access forever. But kindness is not a contract that gives someone permanent ownership of your time. The fact that you were always available before does not mean you are obligated to remain that way forever. Your priorities can change, your tolerance can change, your understanding of the relationship can change. When people realize that your boundaries are not temporary emotions but genuine decisions, they are forced to adjust to a different version of the relationship. Fourth change. You regain your own mind. When you stop being constantly available to other people, one of the greatest changes happens inside your own mind. For a long time, you may have been so focused on responding to everyone else that you forgot what it feels like to listen to yourself. Your attention is always directed outward. Someone sends a message and you respond. Someone needs advice and you become available. Someone becomes upset and you immediately try to repair the situation. Someone pulls away and you begin wondering what you did wrong. Gradually, your emotional state becomes connected to the behavior of other people. This creates a quiet form of dependence. You may believe you are simply being caring, loyal, or helpful, but if your entire day is controlled by the needs and reactions of others, you are no longer completely in control of your own life. Your peace depends on whether someone replies. Your confidence depends on whether someone approves of you. Your mood depends on whether someone gives you attention. You begin living in reaction to events that are not even yours. When you step back, the noise begins to fade. You are no longer immediately responding to every demand, every message, and every emotional disturbance. In the space created by your absence, your own thoughts begin to return. You start noticing how exhausted you have been. You begin recognizing which relationships bring peace and which ones constantly drain you. You start asking questions that were difficult to ask while you were always trying to keep everyone else satisfied. You may begin to wonder whether you actually wanted certain relationships or whether you were simply afraid of losing them. You may realize that you were constantly giving because you wanted to feel needed. You may discover that you were explaining yourself to people who had already decided to misunderstand you. You may notice that you were sacrificing your goals, your time, and your peace to maintain connections that required almost nothing from the other person. Distance gives you the ability to observe your life instead of being trapped inside every emotional moment. When you are constantly available, you are too involved to see clearly. You react before you think. You answer before you understand what you feel. You forgive before you decide whether forgiveness is deserved. But when you become less available, you create a pause between what happens and how you respond. Inside that pause, your mind becomes clearer. You begin to understand that not every problem requires your immediate involvement. Not every person deserves unlimited access to your thoughts, and not every relationship deserves to be maintained at the cost of your own identity. The fifth change. People feel the loss of control. When you stop being constantly available, some people begin to feel a loss of control. They may not have consciously believed they controlled you, but they became accustomed to a predictable pattern. They acted and you reacted. They became distant and you pursued them. They made demands and you adjusted your life. They provoked you and you defended yourself. Over time, they learned which actions produced a response from you, and this knowledge gave them influence over your emotions. The moment you stop reacting in the same way, the entire system changes. Someone sends a message expecting an immediate response, but you take your time. Someone withdraws, expecting you to chase them, but you remain silent. Someone attempts to provoke an argument, expecting you to defend yourself, but you refuse to enter the conflict. The behavior may remain the same, but your reaction has changed, and that is where the balance of power begins to shift. People who are used to having access to your emotions may become confused when they can no longer predict what you will do. They may increase their efforts, they may send more messages, become more dramatic, or attempt to create a stronger emotional reaction. Sometimes they will accuse you of changing. Sometimes they will claim that you no longer care. Sometimes they will try to make you feel guilty for no longer responding according to the old pattern. But their discomfort does not automatically mean that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes people become uncomfortable simply because they can no longer use your old reactions to influence you. They were not necessarily controlling your entire life, but they may have learned how to control your attention, your mood, and your behavior through carefully repeated patterns. The moment you stop allowing every action to dictate your response, you regain control of yourself. You can still care without immediately reacting. You can still love someone without allowing their moods to control yours. You can still listen without accepting every accusation. You can still forgive without returning to the same position where you can be repeatedly hurt. This is not about becoming cold or emotionless. It is about creating space between what someone does and what you choose to do next. That space is where your freedom exists. A person may insult you, but they cannot force you to argue. A person may ignore you, but they cannot force you to chase. A person may attempt to create fear, guilt, or urgency, but they cannot control your response unless you surrender your attention to their strategy. The sixth change. You stop chasing and start observing. When you stop being constantly available, you also stop chasing people and begin observing them. This is one of the most powerful changes because pursuit often distorts your perception. When you are emotionally invested in getting someone's attention, approval, or affection, you become focused on their potential rather than their pattern. You analyze every message, search for hidden meanings, and turn small moments of kindness into evidence that the relationship is more meaningful than it may actually be. Chasing creates emotional blindness. You are so focused on getting a response that you stop asking whether the person is giving you anything worth pursuing. You become concerned with how to make them stay instead of asking whether their presence brings peace, respect, and consistency into your life. You begin measuring your value by their reactions, allowing their attention to determine whether you feel wanted. When you step back, the situation changes. You are no longer trying to force a connection forward. You are watching what happens when you stop doing all the work. Do they reach out? Do they notice your absence? Do they make an effort? Do they ask about you? Do they attempt to repair the distance, or does the relationship simply become silent? These questions reveal more than any emotional conversation could. A person can say they care about you, but their behavior during your absence often reveals the depth of that care. When you are constantly pursuing someone, you may never discover what they would do without your effort because your effort is always covering the truth. Observation requires patience. You must resist the urge to interfere with the outcome. If someone stops contacting you, allow the silence to exist. If someone becomes distant, do not immediately rush forward to restore the connection. If someone only appears when they need something, notice the pattern instead of creating excuses for it. This does not mean assuming the worst about everyone. It means allowing behavior to speak without constantly interrupting it with your own effort. You begin to see who reaches for you when you stop reaching first. You see who values the relationship enough to maintain it. You see who misses you and who only misses the benefits of your attention. The greatest advantage of stepping back is clarity. You stop examining isolated moments and begin begin studying consistent patterns. A single kind message cannot erase months of neglect. A temporary apology cannot replace lasting change. One emotional conversation cannot compensate for a repeated lack of effort. When you stop chasing, you finally have the space to see what has been happening all along, the seventh change. Your value is no longer negotiated. When you stop being constantly available, you also stop allowing other people to negotiate your value. For many people, their entire sense of worth becomes connected to whether someone chooses them, responds to them, stays with them, or gives them attention. They begin trying to convince others that they are worthy of love, respect, loyalty, and consideration. They tolerate poor treatment because they believe losing the relationship would mean losing something they cannot replace. This creates a dangerous imbalance. When someone believes you need their presence more than you need your own peace, they gain leverage. They may become careless with your time because they assume you will continue waiting. They may ignore your needs because they believe you will remain available. They may cross your boundaries because they have learned that your fear of losing them is stronger than your willingness to walk away. But the moment you stop negotiating your value, the entire dynamic changes. You no longer try to convince someone to appreciate you. You no longer compete for attention. You no longer reduce your standards simply to remain connected to someone who gives you inconsistency. Your focus shifts from being chosen to choosing. Instead of asking whether someone wants you, you begin asking whether their behavior deserves access to you. Instead of asking how to make someone stay, you begin asking whether their presence contributes anything healthy to your life. Instead of fearing every possibility of rejection, you begin understanding that rejection from the wrong person can be protection from a life of constant disappointment. This does not mean becoming arrogant or believing that everyone must prove themselves to you. It means understanding that your value is not created by another person's decision. Someone can fail to recognize your worth without reducing it. Someone can reject you without making you inferior. Someone can leave without taking your identity with them. When you stop being available to people who constantly make you question your value, you stop participating in the negotiation. You no longer accept confusion as proof of deep connection. You no longer interpret inconsistency as mystery. You no longer treat disrespect as a price you must pay to keep someone in your life. Your time becomes something you protect. Your attention becomes something you direct carefully. Your presence becomes something you offer where there is mutual respect. You do not need to announce that you are valuable. You demonstrate it by refusing to remain where you are repeatedly treated as though you are disposable, by choosing peace over constant validation, and by understanding that the moment you stop begging someone to recognize your worth, their opinion of you loses the power to determine how you see yourself. 8 change. The right people come closer. When you stop being available to everyone, the people who truly value you begin to become more visible. This is one of the most revealing consequences of creating boundaries around your time, attention, and energy. For a long time, you may believe that keeping everyone close is the same as having meaningful relationship. You may respond to every person, accept every invitation, forgive every disappointment, and remain connected even when the relationship has become one-sided. But when you begin to step back, the difference between genuine connection and convenient access becomes impossible to ignore. Some people will disappear when you stop doing all the work. They will no longer receive your constant attention, your immediate responses, or your endless emotional support, and suddenly the relationship will become quiet. At first, this silence may feel painful. You may wonder whether you made a mistake. You may feel tempted to return to your old behavior just to restore the connection. But sometimes the silence is not a loss. Sometimes it is an answer. The people who truly value you will not demand unlimited access to your life. They will understand that you have responsibilities, goals, personal struggles, and a world that exists beyond the relationship. They will not punish you for needing space. They will not make you feel guilty for having other priorities. They will not treat your boundaries as an insult. Instead, they will respect the fact that your presence is a choice, not an obligation. Healthy relationships can survive distance because they are built on trust rather than constant access. A person who genuinely cares about you does not need to control every moment of your day to feel secure. They understand that a delayed response does not automatically mean rejection. They understand that silence does not always mean anger. They understand that people need room to grow, think, work, and exist independently. When you stop being available to everyone, you create space for relationships that are based on mutual respect. You begin to notice the people who reach out without needing something, the people who remember your struggles, the people who respect your time, the people who do not disappear simply because you are no longer constantly giving. Your absence becomes a filter. It removes those who only wanted access and reveals those who genuinely valued your presence. And once you understand that, you stop fearing the people who leave when you establish boundaries. You begin to recognize that the right people will not require you to abandon yourself in order to keep them close. Sometimes losing access to the wrong people is the price of finally becoming available to yourself. And when you learn to protect your presence, the people who truly deserve it will never need to be forced to appreciate it. The final lesson, stop being a variable to what destroys you. The deepest transformation occurs when you stop being available not merely to people but to patterns. You stop being available to disrespect. You stop being available to emotional chaos. You stop being available to endless excuses. You stop being available to one-sided relationship. You stop being available to conversations that exist only to drain you. You stop being available to the version of yourself that constantly begs to be chosen. This is where true power begins, because the greatest form of availability is the availability you give to yourself, your time, your peace, your ambition, your growth, your future. For years, many people give everything to others and then wonder why they feel empty. They have become available to everyone except themselves. But when you finally step back, something extraordinary happens. You hear your own thoughts again. You remember what you wanted before you became consumed by someone else's needs. You discover that the world does not end when you stop replying immediately. You discover that some people leave when you stop chasing. You discover that some relationships were held together only by your effort. And you discover something even more important. You survive. More than survive. You become stronger because you realize that your greatest fear was never losing them. Your greatest fear was discovering that you could live without them. And once you discover that, the balance changes forever. So stop being available to every demand. Stop answering every call for your attention. Stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Stop chasing those who enjoy watching you pursue them. Stop giving unlimited access to people who offer limited respect. Your absence will reveal who values you. Your silence will reveal who only wanted your reaction. Your boundaries will reveal who respected you and who merely benefited from your lack of them. And your distance will reveal something about yourself. You were never powerless. You were simply giving your power away too freely. The moment you stop being available to everything, you become available to what truly matters, your peace, your purpose, your dignity, your future. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to demand that someone recognize your value. It is to quietly remove your presence from the places where your value was never respected. Because when you stop being available to what diminishes you, everything changes. People change, relationships change, your mind changes. And most importantly, you change. You stop asking to be chosen. You begin choosing. You stop waiting for permission to leave. You begin walking away. You stop fearing your absence. You begin understanding its power. And from that moment forward, your presence is no longer something people can simply assume. It becomes something they must respect, because access to you is no longer automatic. It is earned.